It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We've got an update this morning on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A bill filed Friday in the North Carolina General Assembly takes aim at eliminating DEI initiatives in all state and local government affairs across North Carolina. House Bill 171 proposes a ban on promoting, funding, and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within state agencies, including hiring practices, training practices, and the establishment of DEI offices. It's being sponsored by Representatives Brandon Jones out of Columbus County, Neil Jackson out of Moore County, Jared Lowry out of Robinson County, and Blair Edens out of Wilkes County. Leaders of the efforts argue that taxpayers deserve to know their dollars are funding a government that operates on fairness and equal opportunity, rather than an ideological mandate at the expense of efficiency and public trust. Representative Jones told the Carolina Journal Friday, quote, House Bill 171 is about eliminating the divisive and ineffective DEI bureaucracy in the state and local governments. These programs have injected politics into hiring, promotions, contracting, prioritizing ideology over qualification, and competence. Government jobs and opportunities should be awarded based on merit, not forced quotas or political mandates, end quote. The bill prohibits the use of state funds or public monies for DEI initiatives and bars state agencies and local governments from accepting federal funds that require DEI policies to receive and use those at the national level. If passed, violation of the proposed law could result in civil penalties, removal of office, or even criminal charges. While DEI supporters stress the importance of accessibility and inclusivity for all, opponents like Representative Brandon Jones raise concerns about undermining merit-based hiring and using taxpayer dollars for programs that divide rather than unite people. He continued in his comments to Carolina Journal by saying, for far too long, DEI policies have undermined fairness and efficiency in North Carolina's state and local governments, prioritizing political agendas over merit and qualifications. House Bill 171 puts an end to these divisive programs and ensures that hiring, promotions, and contracts are based on individual achievement, not identity-based quotas. This legislation comes just a couple of days after the Wake County Public School System had a board meeting and revealed deepening divisions over DEI policies. During that meeting, which we covered last week, there was a heated exchange between supporters and critics of these DEI policies. The largest school district in North Carolina, the Wake County Public School System, has not dismantled its Office of Equity Affairs, prompting some North Carolinians to warn of potential federal funding cuts that could impact the district as DEI continues to be rolled back at the national level. 7 of the 9 board members in Wake County are Democrats who have allowed the district's DEI policies to remain intact. Parents called for dismantling the Office of Equity Affairs and DEI programs, warning that failure to comply with the Trump administration by a February the 28th deadline, coming up a little bit later on this week, could result in escalating issues for the district, potentially threatening the school system's federal funding. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, a very hot topic across the nation right now. Some movement going on here in North Carolina. House Bill 171. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:09. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. As we look at different generations and how they vote politically, we've got some new information this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour about Gen Z. Where will they fall on the political spectrum compared to liberal or conservative? To get some more details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Brianna Kraemer from CarolinaJournal.com to the News Hour this morning. It seems like every time we have this new generation name, whether it be Gen Z, Y, X, Boomer, whatever generation we want to use, Brianna, they tend to have a core political leanings. What are we learning about this youngest generation?
Yeah, so we took a look at the data on the State Board of Elections website to determine what exactly is going on in the youngest voter registration group. And it looks like the political leanings among young North Carolina voters have indicated a shift towards more conservative viewpoints as Republican registrations among 18 to 25-year-olds grew significantly between 2020 and 2024, while at the same time, Democrats have seen a decline in Gen Z voters over the same period. So what it looks like from the data is that Gen Z is trending more conservative, and that really comes amid a surplus of alternative media sources that we are seeing and access to different viewpoints online and on social media. There's a lot of different resources that Gen Z has that different generations haven't had access to. And so just indicates that maybe Gen Z's looking at things a little differently than other generations have in the past.
And I'm glad you brought up social media. I think it's fair to assume the younger you are, the more likely you are to not only just use social media as a passer-buyer, but probably be more engaged in that conversation online. We've seen some major shifts over at X, what used to be Twitter, with Elon Musk's purchase. There's some rumblings and some conversation about changes over at Meta, Facebook, with Mark Zuckerberg. So it does seem like if individuals are wanting to get some of this content that maybe in years past was shadow banned or removed from the platform, Brianna, it seems like some of that stuff might actually be available now.
Oh, that certainly is the case. But it's also interesting when you look at the demographics a little bit between men and women. So just to break down the numbers a little bit more for everyone, Republican voter registrations among this age group, 18 to 25, showed a net gain of 10,912 young Republicans over that 4-year span from 2020 to 2024. And that includes 17,400 young men and then 5,000 young women that contributed to the growth, while there was also a decline from undisclosed voters. But all in all, about 10,900 new young Republicans. And like I just mentioned, a vast majority of young men, actually. So that's a driving cause, is men in this age group. And so we also looked at the Democrat side, I should point out, in this age group, and that decreased by 39,000 total.
Wow.
So Republicans went up about 11,000, Democrats down 39,000 for Gen Z voters. So very interesting overall. But again, back to the men versus women, it just looks like social media, the times we're living in now, it's important to also remember this generation was in high school and college during COVID and, had to deal with lockdowns and mask mandates. And I think saw a lot more government involvement or community involvement around them because of stuff like that, a health emergency. And so there's been a lot of different impacts, of course, on how they may be trending more conservative. But for men in particular, social media, and when you look at podcasts, I think that's another interesting thing to bring up. Shows like Joe Rogan, who he predominantly appeals to men, especially young men, and that could definitely be a driving force as well in this shift in ideology among young voters.
Well, and you look at some of the guests that Joe Rogan has had on over the last couple of months, individuals like Elon Musk, like J.D. Vance, Trump himself, back just a couple of weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook and Meta. So I guess it makes sense that if some of these younger men are predominantly listening to shows like Joe Rogan, that's where they're falling into. What do you think? There's this term that was used a lot, and it's not as popular anymore, Brianna, but there was this idea of toxic masculinity, right? If you are a young man, inherently that you have this toxic masculinity that you bring to every conversation and every room that you step in. You think that plays into this as well? These younger men are just sick of being immediately deemed bad or not in favor because they just happen to be a man. You think that plays into it as well?
Yeah, I certainly would think that would play a role in changing their outlook, because they've been hearing that for years on end. And so, maybe that appealed to females on the left. And for years, maybe that was a talking point of toxic masculinity, but that also had a direct response. Then you can see that from men, and young men are, kind of showing through this data that maybe that's not working out so well, because that's just not coming off in a way that they are happy about. And so they're reacting and going to the conservative side because they don't want to be seen as some evil, toxic masculinity talking point from the left. So I think that definitely plays a role into why maybe they might be banding together more, this age group and men in general, in kind of like a show of response to what has been leading up to this for years.
You've got some quotes as well as some of those graphs with numbers that we were talking about. Where do folks keep up to date? Where can they read that this morning?
Yeah, just head on over to carolinajournal.com and you can look at the chart and see all of the data in the article.
Brianna Kraemer joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:16, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at your commute in on a Monday morning. An update on traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. Turning our attention to Washington, D.C. this morning. Late last week, the U.S. Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee advanced the Disaster Loan Accountability and Reform Act with bipartisan support to the Senate floor for consideration. U.S. Senators Tillis and Budd, who represent us here in North Carolina, introduced that legislation in October of last year during the 119th congressional session. Bill's sponsors say that the legislation bolsters oversight, strengthens financial protections, and increases transparency in the Small Business Administration's disaster loan account. A unanimous consent vote in the Senate was blocked back in November by U.S. Senator Rand Paul. According to Budd, who said in a press release, quote, "As we learn the lessons from Hurricane Helene and the federal response, it's imperative that we improve disaster response in a fiscally responsible way. My bill adds much-needed accountability, transparency, and oversight to the SBA's disaster loan account. I thank my colleagues for joining this effort to help those in need while protecting the integrity of taxpayer dollars. The legislation would mandate detailed monthly reports on funding statuses, assumptions, and depletion estimates, enforcing penalties for non-compliance. The budget requests must adhere to a 10-year program advantage for disaster loan subsidies and administrative costs. Additionally, unsecured loan thresholds are restricted when funding drops below 10% of the program's 10-year average cost. It also requires comprehensive reviews of recent funding shortfalls and program inefficiencies, ensuring actionable recommendations for improvement. U.S. Senator Tillis said in a quote, "Small businesses across western North Carolina were hit hard by Hurricane Helene, and it's our responsibility to ensure they have the resources to recover and rebuild. This legislation will enhance oversight, tighten financial controls, and eliminate wasteful spending by instituting clear reporting and budgeting standards. It is essential that we not only support our small businesses during times of crisis, but also uphold the highest level of accountability to ensure those resources are available when urgently needed." Other bill sponsors include Tim Scott of South Carolina, Jody Ernst of Iowa, who is also the chairwoman of the Senate Small Business Committee and Entrepreneur Committee. Jody Ernst said in a statement, "SBA's mismanagement resulted in the disaster loan program running out of money for 66 days last year. This is an unacceptable failure that left disaster victims across the country out in the cold. By advancing this legislation, the Senate Committee on Small Businesses and Entrepreneurship is ensuring that more Americans in need can get critical relief as soon as possible after disaster strikes." You can read more on this legislation by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. In some other national news this morning, on Friday, President Donald Trump had some words of praise for North Carolina Governor Josh Stein on account of their working relationship overseeing Hurricane Helene disaster recovery in the western half of our state. The remarks came as the nation's governors met at the governor's working session, which was held in the White House dining room. You may or may not have seen a clip from that same lunch when President Donald Trump sparred back and forth with the governor of Maine over men and women's sports. The remarks, again, came as the governors were there. He said that his administration has been working hard in part of this state since he took office over a month ago, and that FEMA was a, quote, disaster and did a terrible job in helping hurricane survivors, further pointing out that some ignored houses that had American flags or Trump campaign signs in front of them. Trump said that they are doing things differently now and talked about his dealings with Governor Stein. Quote, "We're working with a very, very nice person that we've had a good relationship with, the newly elected Democrat governor. We're working well together, very well together. We're not using FEMA so much, but it doesn't matter as long as we're getting the job done. But the people are becoming very happy, so I wanted to thank you very much. It's been a great job. We covered last week that President Donald Trump announced that Stein would be named to the National Governors Association of the Council of Governors, which is a bipartisan group of state leaders tasked with strengthening state and federal partnerships on key national security issues like disaster response and military coordination. He will also serve as the co-chair alongside Republican Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. Trump reiterated his earlier remarks last month that states, not the federal government, should handle natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes. But Stein, however, is calling on the Trump administration and the president himself, as well as the federal government, for help as the state is facing nearly $60 billion in damages from Hurricane Helene. On Thursday, he requested an additional $19 billion for Helene recovery and rebuilding, on top of what the state had previously been allocated. In a press release from Stein, he said, quote, "Hurricane Helene destroyed so much across western North Carolina, lives, homes, businesses, farms, and infrastructure, and our state is facing nearly $60 billion in damages. Despite a focused response from the federal, state, local, private sector, and nonprofit partners in the immediate aftermath, 5 months later, it is clear that much more help is needed to restore and rebuild western North Carolina. That is why I am requesting $19 billion in federal funds for Helene recovery. We must support home rebuilding, restore critical infrastructure, and keep businesses open, shore up local governments, and reduce the impacts from future natural disasters," end quote from Stein, who said that the state has already committed more than $1 billion in funding and that he is working with the legislature to obtain more funding for recovery and relief. Also on Thursday, he met with North Carolina Republican Senators Budd and Tom Tillis to ask for their help with the new request, alongside help in securing some funds that have already been allocated. In a post on X, Stein on Friday morning said, quote, "I just want to make sure that North Carolinians get its fair share. I am very encouraged by their positive reaction, and I don't think there's any daylight between them and the government, state government, in terms of making sure that North Carolina gets every resource we possibly can to help people that are in need." Stein also said on X that he was concerned about the Trump administration's plan to cut nearly 84% of the staff from the Office of Community Planning and Development under Housing and Urban Development, HUD, which funds U.S. disaster recovery. Obviously, a lot of moving parts on hurricane relief and recovery that continues. The North Carolina legislature is back this week in Raleigh. They have been back over the last couple of weeks, and there are plenty of joint committee meetings this week, some of them that will be dealing with Helene relief and recovery. We'll track that throughout the week today and throughout the week and over on our website as well at carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:31, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic on your Monday morning, an update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey,
It's 5:37. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. A new bill filed in the North Carolina General Assembly on Friday takes aim at eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives in all state and local government affairs across the entire state. House Bill 171 proposes a ban on the promotion, funding, and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within state agencies. That includes things like hiring practices, training programs, as well as the establishment of DEI offices. The bill was sponsored by Representative Brandon Jones out of Columbus County. He told the Carolina Journal, quote, House Bill 171 is about eliminating the divisive and ineffective DEI bureaucracy in state and local governments. These programs have injected politics into hiring, promotions, as well as contracting and prioritizing ideology over qualifications and competence. Government jobs and opportunities should be awarded based on merit, not forced quotas or political mandates, end quote. The bill prohibits the use of state funds or any sort of public monies for DEI initiatives and bars state agencies and local governments from accepting federal funds that require compliance with those policies. If passed, violations of the proposed law could result in civil penalties, removal from office, or even criminal charges. And while DEI supporters stress the importance of accessibility and inclusivity for all, opponents like Representative Jones raise concerns about undermining merit-based hiring and using taxpayer dollars for programs that divide rather than unite individuals. He said for far too long, DEI policies have undermined fairness and efficiency in North Carolina's state and local governments, prioritizing political agendas over merit and qualifications. House Bill 171 puts an end to these divisive programs and ensures that hiring, promotions, and contracts are based on individual achievement, not identity-based quotas. You can read more details on this legislation. Obviously, we'll be keeping a very close eye on it over on our website this morning, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:39, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We are tracking some details across the state of North Carolina this morning in regards to Certificate of Need. To get some more details on what that news is and what is Certificate of Need, Theresa Opeka, carolinajournal.com, joins us this morning on the News Hour. Certificate of Need, also known as CON, Theresa. It's something that I would assume most North Carolinians are not familiar with. Can you walk us through that this morning?
Sure. Good morning, Nick. Thanks for having me. So Certificate of Need, or CON law, what it falls under is the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services Division of Health Service Regulation. That's a mouthful. It prohibits healthcare providers from acquiring certain medical equipment or developing new health services, facilities, facility beds, like getting extra beds in a hospital, without the prior approval from DHHS. What they think, what they're hoping to accomplish when they have the con law in place is that it restricts unnecessary increases in healthcare costs and limits unnecessary health services and facilities based on geographic, demographic, and economic considerations. So in a nutshell, they think they're trying to save money by having this competition or judging where maybe a new hospital is built, who gets a new operating room, things of that nature.
Well, and I guess now that you've explained it, the name makes a little bit of sense. The Certificate of Need, you need these various machines, you need these beds. However, Theresa, you have to make this request to the state of North Carolina, and the news that we're tracking this morning, that's not always approved by the state.
That is correct. So in the latest round, they gave some approvals this month. State regulators approved an additional 70 hospital beds and 4 operating rooms for hospitals in Wake County. That is where the state capital, Raleigh, is. But that's a far cry from the 246 hospital beds and 13 additional operating rooms that were requested. Now, some of those beds and rooms were also part of a larger request for 3 new hospitals, and they were also rejected.
So you've got these, obviously a lot of needs in regards to medical care. North Carolina, and I think, Theresa, we talked about this probably back a couple of weeks, maybe a couple months ago at this point, with skyrocketing healthcare costs in the state, some of the highest in the entire country, big wait times when you're trying to get in and see a specialist or see almost any kind of medical professional. We have a serious issue here in this state, and it sounds like things are being requested and the state's not approving them. What's the justification?
Yeah, like you said, we have some of the worst ratings we've gotten from Forbes Advisor last October. They were ranked the Tar Heel State as the 10 worst state for healthcare. Basically, going back to what certificate of need is based on, they said it restricts unnecessary increases in healthcare costs. This is the basis. They think, well, we're going to split up the requests from the different hospitals that requested this, and we're trying to save money and stay in the best interests of the state. However, you've got so many people moving into the state. We actually have a link in the report that I did about how many people are moving to the state, and access to health care. You already are stretched to the limits for access to health care. Ergo, like what you just said, if you're restricting new hospitals being built, a new operating room, maybe a freestanding facility, I don't know how that's helping the people coming in when there is such a need for that. So that's basically what it is. Also, getting back to that, the one rating from Forbes, earlier last year, about this time last year, they also ranked North Carolina as the worst for healthcare costs. So it just doesn't bode well when you're having these restrictions, and when they think they're saving money, but in fact, it's really the opposite.
Well, and there's also some other issues with certificate of need that we've briefly covered in the past as medical facilities, these large medical groups, Theresa, that folks are probably familiar with throughout the state. They can go into many areas and successfully get this certificate of need, but then they choose not to build, which essentially boxes everybody else out of the market.
Yes, that is the case as well. That is another factor in this. You are right. Yep.
You had the opportunity to chat with Brian Balfour over at the John Locke Foundation. What did he have to say about certificate of need in this ruling that we're talking about this morning?
Sure. So, I mean, right off the bat, he calls it absurd that we the latest ruling on this. He says, so it's so incredible at this time when so many North Carolinians are struggling to find access to medical care, that the state really insists on placing these limits on medical providers that are willing to expand their services. I'm just briefly going to get off of his quote for 1 second. One of those was from Winston-Salem. It was Novant Health. They want to propose a brand new hospital for Nightdale, and they were shot down. And they have tried getting into the Triangle, the Raleigh area market for a number of years, and they've always been shot down. Not sure exactly why. But getting back to Brian's quote, he says providers, they really shouldn't have to ask for permission from a state commission, which at times may include a competing provider to invest in equipment and facilities that will expand to patients. And he says the North Carolina legislators really need to seriously look at considering rolling back the outdated and intrusive restrictions on the state's healthcare providers. Like, if you see this need, why do you need to ask permission? You should be able to go ahead and build. There are so many states that did get rid of con laws in the past. There are still quite a few that do have them, but they see that as being an issue. Pacific Legal Foundation said residents in states with certificate of need laws, they receive lower quality health care, they have access to fewer facilities, pay more for care, and wait longer for care. And the research shows that certificate of need laws lead to bad patient outcomes. So, there's a lot of evidence against these laws as well.
This is something that we'll be keeping an eye on through the General Assembly's long session. A great update this morning from Theresa Opeka. You can read more on her story by visiting carolinajournal.com. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 546, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic on your Monday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Hot.
Good morning again. It's 5:53. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Turning our attention back to Washington, D.C. this morning on Friday, President Donald Trump had some words of praise for North Carolina Governor Josh Stein on account of their working relationship overseeing Hurricane Helene disaster recovery in the western half of our state. The remarks came as the nation's governors met at the governor's working session, which was held in the White House State Dining Room Friday. You may have seen a clip from that with the president battling off with the governor of Maine over women's and young female sports. Trump said that his administration has been working hard in that part of the state since he took office over a month ago, and that FEMA was a, quote, disaster and did a terrible job in helping hurricane survivors, further pointing out that some were ignored because they had American flags or Trump campaign signs in front of their houses. Trump said that they are doing things differently now and talked about his dealings with Governor Stein, who he noted, of course, is a Democrat. Trump announced last week that Stein was named to the National Governors Association of Council of Governors. That is a bipartisan group of state leaders that are tasked with strengthening the state/federal partnerships on key national issues like things like national security, disaster response, as well as military coordination. Stein will serve as a co-chair of that organization alongside the Virginia governor, Republican Glenn Youngkin. Trump reiterated his earlier remarks last month that the states, not the federal government, should handle hurricane disaster recovery and relief, other natural disasters as well, like tornadoes. However, Stein is calling on Trump and the federal government for help as the state is facing nearly $60 billion in damages from Hurricane Helene. On Thursday of last week, the governor requested an additional $19 billion for Helene on top of what the state had previously been allocated. He said in a press release, quote, "Hurricane Helene destroyed so much across western North Carolina. Lives, homes, businesses, farms, and infrastructure, and our state is facing nearly $60 billion in damages. Despite a focused response from the federal, state, local, and private sector, as well as nonprofit partners in the immediate aftermath, 5 months later, it is clear that much more help is needed to restore and rebuild western North Carolina. That's why I'm requesting $19 billion in federal funds for Helene recovery. We must support home rebuilding, restore critical infrastructure, keep businesses open, shore up local governments, and reduce the impacts from future natural disasters," end quote there from Governor Stein. The governor said that the state has already committed more than $1 billion in funding and that he is working with the legislature to obtain more funding for recovery and relief efforts. Also on Thursday, when the governor was in D.C., he met with Senators Budd and Tom Tillis to ask for their help with new requests, along with help in securing some funds that have already been allocated but have yet to be doled out. In response to that meeting, he said, quote, "I just want to make sure that North Carolina gets its fair share. I am very encouraged by their positive reaction. I don't think that there's any daylight between them and the government, state government, in terms of making sure that North Carolina gets every resource we possibly can to help people that are in need," end quote there from Governor Stein. The many discussions still ongoing in regards to hurricane relief and recovery, as the governor noted, more than $1 billion already allocated from state government. We've got a very busy calendar for the North Carolina legislature in Raleigh this week, a full packed day tomorrow of meetings dealing with appropriations. So we'll be learning likely some more details about the state's relief efforts in the coming days and weeks. We'll keep an eye on it over at carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you 5 to 6 tomorrow morning right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.